Have you ever heard a voice that didn't just sound beautiful, but felt like it stopped time for a moment? Not because it hit every note, but because it made you remember something you didn't even realize you'd forgotten. It started with a blurry, shaky little video, 38 seconds long. No fancy lighting, no sound system, just an elderly woman sitting on her front porch mimicking a full symphony orchestra, using nothing but her voice. No instruments, no accompaniment. Just one woman recreating strings, brass woodwinds, even percussion, with nothing but breath and memory. And somehow, it was perfect. The internet lit up. Who is she? Is this even real? Why haven't we ever heard of her before? Her name is Clara Monroe, 70 years old, from a quiet little town called Redding, California. No stage history, no YouTube channel, no glossy past. For over 4 decades, she stayed away from the spotlight, far from stages, microphones, or anything that would require applause. But the truth is, Clara had once been a hidden voice behind some of the most haunting harmonies ever recorded, ghost vocals on forgotten film scores, harmonies for songs that made people cry without knowing why. She never got credit. She never asked for it. But real music doesn't care who gets the credit. And sometimes, when the world needs it most, a note that's been tucked away for years finds its way back into the air. So, what happened? Why did she disappear from the music world? And what made her finally sing again after all this time? This story doesn't begin with a spotlight. It begins with one quiet note played in the stillness, and the moment the world stopped to truly listen. They thought she was just a sweet old woman humming to herself on a porch in a town too quiet to be remembered. That's what made it so unforgettable. It was a Sunday morning in Redding, California, the kind of town where the mail comes late and the neighbors know when your tomatoes are ripe. Clara Monroe sat in her usual spot on the front porch, wrapped in a worn knitted shawl, tapping her finger against the armrest of her rocking chair. The breeze played softly with the wind chimes overhead, and she hummed not a tune, but a full orchestra. Cello, oboe, flute, trumpet, each part perfectly shaped by nothing but her voice. No instruments, no microphone. Just Clara and the world as she heard it. Her grandson Will, 14 and tech-savvy, caught it on his phone. He thought it was funny. Baba's Orchestra, he called it. Posted it online without much thought. He never expected it to go viral. None of them did. Within 48 hours, the video had over 1 million views. Some thought it was AI. Others called it a hoax, but most just listened. And then the phone rang. It was the first time the landline had rung in weeks. Clara picked it up like it might bite her. Mrs. Monroe, a young woman's voice chirped. "This is Sadie. I'm calling from Voices Unseen. It's a television series we showcase rare and extraordinary musical talent. We saw your video, and we think you might be perfect for our next season." Clara blinked. A show television. She almost hung up, because here's the thing about Clara Monroe years ago. She'd been a studio vocalist, the invisible kind. She was the voice behind harmony tracks and background layers and dozens of songs no one remembered the credits to. She never toured, never got a spotlight, but she remembered every note. Then life happened. A marriage, a baby girl, a home in a town where the loudest sound was the postman's bicycle bell. Clara put music down, like people put away winter coats gently, and with a promise to come back to it someday. She never did. Until now. Will burst into the room right after the call. His cheeks were flushed with excitement. "Grandma, did they call?" "I heard the phone." "Was it Voices Unseen?" "Did they say yes?" She looked at him, this boy with his father's eyes and her daughter's energy, and something inside her softened. He believed in her in a way she'd forgotten how to believe in herself. That night, long after Will went to bed, Clara sat in the dark and opened the dusty chest at the foot of her bed. Inside was a stack of old music sheets, her favorite tuning fork, and a scarf, a deep navy silk with golden notes embroidered on the edges. Her late husband Richard had given it to her after her first studio session. She held it to her face and breathed in whatever scent time had not taken. Somewhere between the pages and silence, she hummed one note. It started soft, uncertain, but it didn't stay that way. And by the time her voice found the second note, Clara Monroe wasn't humming anymore. She was remembering, and what she remembered might just be the thing the world forgot it needed. They said Clara Monroe had perfect pitch, but what they didn't know, what she never explained, was that she didn't just hear sound, she saw it. in shades and swirls and soft glows that danced behind her eyelids like watercolor in motion. When she was 7, Clara once told her mother that the doorbell rang in lemon yellow. Her mother had laughed gently, called her imaginative, and poured her another glass of milk. But it wasn't imagination. Clara had what scientists later named synesthesia. Certain sounds sparked flashes of color in her mind. C major was warm cream, G minor, a deep plum, and every harmony had a hue. In her teens, she started playing piano by ear. Not because she read music well, she didn't, but because she remembered the colors of the chords. Her fingers followed light. Her voice followed movement. She'd sing into silence and fill it with color no one else could see. By 20, she was working nights in a Los Angeles studio. Not as a lead vocalist, those were reserved for glossy names and younger women who came wrapped in glitter. Clara was background, harmony, texture. Producers came to her not for fame, but for feel. She could walk into a room, listen to a rough take, and say, "This needs something blue." And somehow she always knew exactly what that meant. Her favorite session was in '78, a song called Midnight Rain that played over the end credits of a movie no one remembers. But the harmony, that was Clara. She sang it in one take. The engineer said later it gave him goosebumps, and he didn't even believe in that sort of thing. But even back then, Clara never chased credit. It wasn't humility. It was instinct. She knew that chasing the spotlight too hard could bleach out the color of the thing she loved. And so, when she got pregnant, when Richard said, "We could raise a family somewhere quieter," Clara said yes. She packed her scarves, her tapes, and her voice, and traded neon for the scent of jasmine on her front porch. She never once regretted it. But that didn't mean the music left her. Even in the quiet of Reading sounds still painted across her senses. The kettle's whistle was sky blue, the cat's purring was violet fuzz, and the wind through pine trees that was always silver. What changed everything wasn't the call from voices unseen. It wasn't even the viral video. It was the moment Clara stood in front of her bathroom mirror and whispered the first harmony in decades, and saw amber light spill across the tile floor. She hadn't realized how dark it had gotten inside her, until color came rushing back, and something else followed memory, not just of the music, but of what she gave up, and why. There's a quiet sort of grief in knowing the world never heard your name, even when it heard your voice. But there's a peace, too, in knowing that your gift is still yours, no matter how long it stays unopened. That night, Clara lay in bed unable to sleep. She stared at the ceiling and let her mind wander to places she'd stored away like old sheet music, tightly folded, yellowed at the edges, but never discarded. And somewhere around 3 a.m., she whispered almost to herself, "I remember how it feels to be color." Then she reached for the scarf at the foot of the bed and started to hum a note that didn't belong to the past anymore. Sometimes the scariest part of being seen is realizing someone was looking all along. Clara had left the letter unopened for 2 days. It sat on the edge of her kitchen table, weighted by an old sugar jar like it might float away otherwise. The envelope was cream-colored, embossed with gold lettering, "Voices Unseen, Official Contestant Invitation." The ink shimmered faintly in the sunlight, as if daring her to believe it was real. She'd read the email. She'd even answered a few follow-up calls from the assistant producer, a chipper girl named Sadie, who called Clara ma'am. So often it made her feel 10 years older than she was. "They want you in LA next Thursday," Will had said, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "You get a flight, a hotel, everything. You'll be on TV. That word alone made Clara's stomach tighten. She hadn't been on a stage in 5 decades, had never stood in front of a live audience unless you counted the church choir, and even then, she always preferred the second row. She didn't wear heels anymore, didn't even own makeup beyond a half-used tube of rose lipstick she kept for Easter Sundays. She tried to imagine it, the bright lights, the cameras, the pressure. Her voice raw, untrained, aged, caught in the middle of a television production built for perfectly polished stars. What if she froze? What if her voice cracked? What if she opened her mouth and nothing came out? That fear whispered in her ear louder than any note ever had. But it wasn't the fear of failure that held her back. It was something softer, more complicated. Clara had spent so many years learning how to disappear gracefully, she wasn't sure she knew how to step forward without apologizing. That evening, she walked out to the porch, scarf around her shoulders, tea in hand. Will followed her phone in his pocket, but eyes steady. "Are you really not going to do it?" he asked. Clara didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out at the yard at the worn rocking chair across from hers, the one Richard used to sit in, humming along, whenever she sang while folding laundry or watering the roses. She missed his silence the most, the kind that never needed to be filled. "I'm not sure the world wants to hear me," she said quietly. Will smiled. "Then maybe you should sing for the people who never stopped listening, even if it's just one." That night, Clara opened the envelope. Inside was a simple itinerary, a waiver form, and a small handwritten note from the show's director. "Your voice reminded me of my grandmother's. She passed before I ever heard her sing. Thank you for reminding me what music feels like." Clara folded the paper with steady hand, stood from the table, and whispered just loud enough for the walls to hear, "Then I'll go." And somewhere deep in the house, a wind chime rang soft, certain and almost in tune. There's a kind of silence that only lives behind curtains, right before a spotlight hits. Clara Monroe had never stood in it before, but now she was about to. The trip to Los Angeles had felt like walking through someone else's dream. The flight was smooth but surreal. The hotel smelled like citrus and new carpet. And the show's assistant, Amanda, early 20s, dressed like every season of spring, at once kept calling her Miss Clara with a cheerful rhythm that made Clara feel oddly precious. The studio was a different universe, bright, buzzing. Everyone moved fast, spoke fast, smiled fast. Stylists glided past with rolling racks. Singers warmed up in corners, their voices rising and falling like ocean waves, sharp, confident, unbothered by nerves. Clara walked through them like a breeze through stained glass. Not unwelcome, but not quite seen. When she entered the rehearsal room, the sound engineer looked up and did a slight double take. "You're our, contestant from Reading," he asked, polite but visibly unsure where to place her. Clara gave a small nod and offered her name like a peace offering. He smiled a little tight. "Cool, just relax. We'll run the track once. You don't have to do much, just feel it out." Clara stood at the mic. The room hushed, and then the track began. It wasn't a song she had picked, just a generic piano loop for warm-up. But within seconds, her body responded instinctively. Her breath aligned. Her throat remembered. And before anyone could stop her, she began to hum, not on top of the music, but inside it. The sound engineer froze. She layered her voice like a brush painting color on glass-soft harmonies, rising textures, notes so gentle they almost felt like breath itself. The room shifted. Heads turned. When the track ended, the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Someone whispered, "Did she just harmonize the click track?" Amanda clapped, eyes wide. "You didn't even flinch." Clara smiled just barely. "I wasn't nervous about the mic," she said. "I was nervous about the mirrors." Later that night, back in her hotel room, Clara stood in front of the full-length mirror. It was framed in gold, far too glamorous for her liking. She stared at her reflection for a long time, noticing the silver in her hair, the way her hands held each other when they weren't sure what to do. This was the stage she'd never stepped on. Not the one with the lights and applause, but the one inside, the one that required her to show up without hiding behind harmony or history or someone else's name in the credits. She reached into her suitcase, pulled out the old scarf with the golden notes, and laid it across the dresser like a quiet vow. Tomorrow she'd sing not for a room or a rating or redemption. She'd sing for herself. The lights didn't blind her, not like she thought they would. What stunned Clara Monroe was the silence. Not awkward, not impatient, just waiting. When her name was called and she stepped onto the stage, there wasn't much to announce her. No flashy intro, no montage, just the quiet curiosity of a live audience, wondering if the woman in the blue shawl had wandered onto the wrong set. She took her place at center stage, hands folded gently, her eyes scanning a sea of strangers lit only by ambient glow. She didn't wear makeup, she didn't wear heels. She didn't need either. The host smiled kindly. "Mrs. Clara Monroe from Redding, California. Tell us, what will you be singing today?" Clara's voice was soft but steady, an arrangement I used to sing to myself when I couldn't sleep. No background, just me. There was a beat of pause. One judge raised a curious eyebrow, and then Clara closed her eyes. The first note didn't impress. It disarmed. It didn't soar. It settled. Warm and full like a blanket over a memory. Her tone carried the kind of imperfection that only comes from something honest. shaped not by Polish, but by years of being held gently in silence. And as the melody bloomed, something extraordinary happened. She began to layer harmonies with nothing but her own voice. No instrument, no loop pedal. Her mouth formed an echo, a counterpoint, a choral blend that seemed to come from nowhere. She recreated the feel of an entire string section, then faded it into a hum that tugged at the air like breath on glass. And somewhere around the third note, no one was watching an elderly woman anymore. They were hearing something they didn't know they missed. By the final measure, the room was still. Even the cameras paused. When the last sound faded, Clara opened her eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She just stood there, hands by her side, as if unsure whether she'd done too much or not enough. Then came the applause, not the forced kind, not polite. It came like rain after drought, relieved, grateful, and real. One of the judges leaned into the mic, visibly shaken. Clara, that wasn't just a performance. That was a remembering. And Clara, for the first time, felt seen, not as a novelty, not as a surprise, but as a voice that had always been there, just waiting for someone to stop talking long enough to hear it. Backstage, someone handed her a glass of water. She didn't take it. Instead, she looked up at the rafters above the stage and whispered to no one in particular, "I wasn't ready then, but I am now." And behind her, a quiet knock came at the dressing room door. Some words arrived late, but the heart still knows how to read them. Clara Monroe had just returned to her hotel room, the adrenaline of the performance still echoing in her bones. Her shawl smelled faintly of stage lights and lavender powder, the kind of scent that reminded her of backstage whispers of times when she used to wait outside the booth, hoping for one more take that never came. There was a cream envelope resting on the nightstand. No logo, no return address. Just her name handwritten in a style she hadn't seen in decades. Tight, formal, familiar. She sat slowly on the edge of the bed, fingers hovering above the flap, before she opened it with the care one reserves for something fragile. Inside was a single sheet slightly yellowed at the edges, and as her eyes traced the first line, her breath caught. "Clara, I watched you tonight. I almost didn't. But I did." She knew that handwriting. She hadn't seen it since the letter she'd thrown away 46 years ago, unsigned, unexplained, from the man who once told her, "Your voice is too delicate for the market. It's background, not front stage material." His name was David Langford, former head producer at Grey Room Studios, the one who had shelved her demo tapes and quietly recommended younger voices for roles she was promised. "You once told me music was something you didn't sing, you remembered. I didn't understand it then. I do now. I was wrong. About the industry, about you, about what it means to matter. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed to say it while I still can, before my hearing fades entirely. You were unforgettable. I just didn't know how to say it then." Clara's eyes welled not out of grief, but recognition. This wasn't an apology for her career. It was one man's reckoning with his own silence. She folded the letter neatly, set it beside the lamp. Then she opened her phone and played a short clip from the taping, a moment from her performance when the harmonies layered like breath. She watched it not to hear herself, but to feel what he must have heard. And for the first time, she didn't flinch. It was never about bitterness. Clara hadn't held that for years. What she felt now was something else, like a lock quietly clicking open inside her, releasing something she didn't know had stayed shut. The words didn't change her past, but they allowed her future to speak a little louder. She looked at the city lights beyond the curtain, shimmering in soft rhythm, then glanced at the open envelope, her name still staring back at her like a reflection she finally recognized. And then her phone buzzed again, this time with a name she never expected. It wasn't from the past. It was an offer for what came next. It wasn't the applause that brought the offer. It was the silence that came after. Clara Monroe had just finished washing her face when her phone buzzed again. One short vibration, then stillness. She picked it up with the same hesitance she'd once reserved for opening stage doors. A new message. This one wasn't from a producer, not from the network. It was from a name she hadn't seen since her early studio days, Elise Hammond. Elise was now head of Harmony Arc Records, an independent label known for acoustic projects and voice-only arrangements. But decades ago, she had been Clara's studio roommate, harmonizing late into the night, with nothing but 2 mugs of coffee and a shared dream they never said out loud. The message was simple. Saw the show. My team cried. Want to talk? Clara didn't answer right away. She paced, She folded her scarf. She thought about the last time she recorded something real, something personal. It was a cassette tape she made for Richard on their 10th anniversary, tucked between two books, and never played in public. She could still remember the first track, her voice alone, recreating the sound of rain on a tin roof in 3 layers of harmony. The next morning, they called. Elise's voice was calm, steady. "We're not interested in a comeback album," she said. "We're interested in a legacy one. Just you. Just the sounds you carry, unfiltered. A small studio, a live mic. No pitch correction, no stylists, no marketing plans designed for youth culture. Just Clara singing the songs she'd never had the chance to record and the ones she'd never dared write down." Clara listened. She didn't interrupt, but in her chest something stirred. A memory not of loss, but of longing. "What if my voice cracks?" she asked, half smiling. Elise didn't hesitate. "Then it'll be human. And it'll be yours. There's a particular kind of offer that doesn't rewrite a life, but instead gives it a final stanza. Not to fix the beginning, but to give the ending a melody it deserves." Clara hung up. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She simply exhaled. Deep and full. And when Will arrived at the hotel later that afternoon, still glowing with pride from the show, she handed him her old songbook pages, filled with half-finished thoughts, humming lines and chords scribbled between grocery lists. "You still have your music app on that tablet?" she asked, almost playfully. He blinked. You want to record?" She nodded. "No costumes, no camera, just me. And the notes I remember." He opened the tablet, launched the app, and waited. And Clara Monroe, voice steady, hands calm, sang the first original note of a song she'd never had the courage to finish. Until now. It didn't happen in a big studio. No red light blinking above the door, no sound engineer counting down from 3. The recording that changed everything began on a Tuesday afternoon in a quiet room with a single breath. Clara Monroe stood barefoot on the carpet of her Reading living room. Will sat across from her on the couch, holding the tablet like it was something sacred. The windows were open. Outside, a soft breeze lifted the lace curtain just enough to make the whole moment feel like it had been rehearsed by nature. There was no microphone stand, no vocal booth. Just Clara, her scarf laid carefully over the arm of the old piano bench, her voice steady as ever, her hands no longer searching. She started with the melody she used to hum while folding laundry, a simple tune born not from theory, but from memory, one she'd built quietly over the years, adding notes the way others added flowers to a garden. When the first line came, it wasn't polished, it was better, it was true. Will tapped record, but she didn't notice. Clara sang about things that didn't have names, the ache in early morning light, the comfort of silence beside someone who truly sees you, the kind of grief that softens but never fades. There were no rhymes, just rhythm. Just the shape of feeling laid out in tones only she could string together. Halfway through, Will lowered the tablet to his lap, watching not the waveform, but her face. It was the first time he saw her not as his grandmother, but as an artist, one who had never needed a stage, only a moment where the world agreed to stop and listen. When she finished, she didn't ask how it sounded. She just smiled, then turned to him and said, "That's the one. I want that one to be the first." He nodded, and the rest, she looked down at the notebook in her lap. "They'll come. I'm not in a rush anymore." They spent the rest of the afternoon recording 2 more pieces, each one raw, unfiltered, perfectly imperfect. Will backed them up, uploaded them to a secure drive, and sent a message to Elise. "We're ready." By evening, the sun slipped through the window in a quiet ribbon of gold. Clara didn't say much. She didn't have to. The air was full of something more lasting than applause piece. And perhaps that's what made it powerful, not that it was a return to form, but a return to voice. To the kind of voice that had nothing to prove, only something to offer. Later that night, while Clara slept, Elise uploaded the first track, just one. No image, no fanfare, just a name, Clara Monroe. And by morning, something unexpected had begun to bloom. It wasn't trending. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. By 9:12 the next morning, Clara Monroe's first recording, simply titled "Light in the Kitchen," had less than 400 plays on Harmony Arc's website. But the first comment came just after play number 17. "I don't know who this woman is, but her voice sounds like a letter I wish I had written to my mother before she passed." By noon, a second appeared. It made me cry, and I don't know why. Maybe because it didn't ask me to. And by the end of that day, Elise's inbox had more than 100 emails. Not from talent scouts or influencers, but from nurses, teachers, fathers, granddaughters. People who weren't looking for music. Just stillness. Just something that felt like it came from a real place and hadn't been run through a machine before it reached their ears. Clara didn't read the comments at first. Will showed her a few, cautiously unsure whether she'd be overwhelmed. But Clara just smiled quietly and nodded, like she was recognizing faces in an old photograph. "That's what I was singing to," she said. "Not an audience, them." One message stood out handwritten, mailed with a stamp, and forwarded to Elise's office. It came from a retirement home in Wisconsin. A man named Gerald, 84, had listened to the track on a shared tablet during group quiet hour. His note read, "I haven't spoken much since my wife passed in 2019. But I heard your song. It didn't fix me. It didn't promise to. It just sat next to me for a little while. That was enough." Clara held the letter in her hands, tracing the curve of each word like it was a melody. It was never about charting, never about fanfare. The songs were never meant to compete. They were meant to comfort, to companion, to sit gently with people in places where noise had taken over, and remind them what softness could still sound like. There's a quiet kind of power in knowing that your story told exactly the way you lived. It is enough for someone else to find a piece of themselves in it. Clara began writing again. Not in pursuit of more responses, but because the silence inside her had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It had room now. And when Elise called her with the news that her track had just been picked for an NPR special on Songs That Heal, Clara didn't cry. She just closed her notebook, smiled, and said, "Let's make room for one more." That evening, Will found her in the kitchen, humming a new line she hadn't written down yet. He asked what it was, and Clara said with a glint of mischief, "The beginning of the ending." Not all finales are played with a crescendo. Some are whispered one clear note at a time. Clara Monroe didn't announce her last recording. She didn't tell Elise or Will or even herself that it would be the final one. It just happened one quiet morning when the sky outside was pale and still and the tea on the stove hadn't yet begun to sing. She sat in her small studio, the one Will had helped her build in the back room, surrounded by the things that mattered, a scarf folded neatly on a chair, her notebook open to a page with no title, and a tablet already blinking red. Her voice came in slowly, older, but not fragile. It carried weight, not wear. It told the story of a girl who once sang behind curtains and now no longer needed them. It told the story of mornings where music was made not for money or for memory, but simply because it was still inside her. That song, 3 minutes and 19 seconds long, was the one that made Elise cry during final mastering. The one Will played for his friends at school and said, "My grandma made this, for real." It wasn't released with fanfare. It didn't need a billboard, but it ended with the final line Clara had written months before, and only just now dared to sing aloud. "I was never waiting for a spotlight, just a place where my voice could stay." And in that moment, she found it. Some people live their whole lives chasing permission. Clara Monroe lived hers, learning to listen first to others and then finally to herself. The note she ended on wasn't fame. It was freedom. Because in the end, the most powerful stories are the ones we choose to finish, even if no one ever asked us to begin. If this story touched you, press 1 in the comments to let us know you're listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that echo long after the music fades, because sometimes all it takes is one quiet voice finally heard.